Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. We're super excited to have Fatema Sumar here with us today. I'm going to read her bio and then we're going to jump into the questions. Fatema Sumar is the executive director of the Harvard Center for International Development and an adjunct lecturer in public policy at Harvard Kennedy School, where she teaches policy design and development diplomacy. In government, Fatima served across 4 Democratic and Republican administrations. Most recently, Fatima was vice president of compact operations at the U.S. Millennium Challenge Corporation with the rank of assistant secretary. Fatima also served as deputy assistant secretary of State for South and Central Asia at the U.S. Department of State, leading efforts on regional economic and energy connectivity, and as Presidential Management Fellow. In Congress, she was a senior professional staff member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee focused on Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and the broader region. In civil society, Fatima was the vice president of global programs at Oxfam America, overseeing development and humanitarian programs to fight the injustice of poverty. She's on the board of directors of Bluemont, on advisory boards at Princeton SPIA, Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability, Women in Defense, Diplomacy and Development, and Muslim Americans in Public Service. Fatima is the author of the book, The Development Diplomat, Working Across Borders, Boardrooms, and Bureaucracies to End Poverty. She graduated with an MPA from Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, where she received the prestigious Stokes Award, and a BA in Government from Cornell. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you here.
It's great to see you, Lena. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to jump into the first question, which is kind of just about your career and background. You've had an incredible career in various aspects of development, as I mentioned, diplomacy, design, and the creation of critical programs, and the teaching of policy design and development diplomacy at Harvard. When did you first become interested in this area? What motivated you then and today to invest your time and energy in development?
Well, maybe this resonates with you and our listeners, but really I never really knew what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I mean, I still joke, I'm still trying to figure out what to do when I grow up. All I knew though was when I was, young kid and a teenager, I was really interested in public service and I really wanted to serve. And that came from, I think, actually, Girl Scouts, where we did a lot of community service missions. And I kept like raising my hand and being like, yes, I will help clean up the riverbed. I will volunteer at a soup kitchen, whatever that kind of it was. I noticed that like I always signed myself up in these volunteer roles to do things. And so, I always say to students here when they're like, well, I don't know what my it is or what I want to do. I always say, well, actually, most of us probably have a really strong sense of our North Star from when we were a child. There's something about like something that just drives you when you were really young and you don't really know how to make a career out of it then yet, but you kind of have your North Star. And I think it comes really early, maybe as early as when you were a child. So for me, it was this really strong sense of service. I wanted to serve and I wanted to help others. And that also came out of a family upbringing, a religious and community upbringing, where we're always taught to value the community over the individual. And that our job and my role was really to help figure out how I could use whatever I had to help others, right? So that's where I think some of this came from and what really kind of led me on this pathway. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know like what to study or what jobs to take. So, I do what all of you do. I experimented, right? I tried certain things. I was a secretary at a law firm or something. I clerked at a law firm. I worked at one of my worst internships ever in high school or college. And college was um, Merrill Lynch at an investment firm to see what that was like. I couldn't tell you because I don't know what I did. I never understood what I did. That was pretty boring for me. I tried different things. I think I was a research assistant working for a food and ag lab, working on the Philippines sometime in college, and that really didn't do it for me, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you experiment a little bit and you try different things. Um, in the beginning, it led me to study international relations and foreign policy and government. That really appealed to me a lot. I didn't know what to do with that though, but that's what I studied. And then, I kind of was really drawn to nonprofits. So both in college, where I worked for organizations and helped found organizations at the college level. When I graduated, I worked for nonprofits, both national nonprofits and highly state and local nonprofits. And then eventually I found my way after grad school to the US government, which is kind of service at the national level, right, as a public servant. And I started out very much what I studied in foreign policy and in national security. And I kept moving around, trying new things. And I think one of the things that I'd leave you with is a really strong sense of just being a curious learner. And it's okay to not know what you don't want to, what you want to do or not do. Just keep learning and asking questions and being curious. And your curiosity is going to take you from one thing to the next. And you're going to discover you love something and you're going to discover you really hate something and it's not who you are. And that's the best kind of discovery along the way. So that's how my twists and turns have got me to the different titles and organizations that you mentioned in the bio. But it really was this like lifelong journey of discovery that started really when I was a kid.
I think that definitely resonates with me right now. I think just not quite knowing where I want to go or what I want to do, but knowing what I'm interested in. And I really loved what you said about being present and just signing up for things and being willing to try anything. And it might be scary, but it's worth it to figure out what you're passionate about and what you're not. And I'm not a Girl Scout, but I eat the cookies like I am. But with that, I want to ask you about your book, The Development Diplomat, Working Across Borders, Boardrooms, and Bureaucracies to End Poverty. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the book, why you decided to write on this topic, what your findings were, and how we can relate that to current trends today?
Yeah. So the book was an accident. It came out of COVID. Um, and it came out of like, and this may resonate with you and others during COVID when, it seemed like the only thing we could do for a year plus is go on long walks. And so every day I, became a walker and I'd find this path and that path. And you get to think a lot when you're walking. And so I started this kind of journey of self-reflection at that point about my career, my life, what I appreciated about it, my blessings. I had a lot of gratitude moments. And one of my realizations through that process was that when I looked back from 15 years, 20 years earlier in my career and in my life, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really have a lot of mentorship. And I was thinking about what would I tell my 20-year-old self if I could do it again? What would I tell myself, from me in the future, if we could had a back to the future moment? And I would tell myself that it's okay to not know. I would tell myself that you can have these really kind of cool careers that take you from place to place and institution to institution, all with the same thread line, which is what the book is about, which is how to help communities around the world build healthier, thriving societies and how I could play a small role doing that. And I wanted to write, and so it came together that the self-reflection came together that why don't I see if I could pull together some of these stories and write it for the next generation so that, you could read something with this idea of a protagonist that maybe looks more like you, maybe has more shared reflections and experiences than the protagonists I had growing up, which were all kind of the same white male prototype which are great to learn from, but often I didn't have a lot personally or culturally in common with them. And so I wanted to also write a book with a protagonist who looks a little bit different, who sounds a little bit different, and has a different journey. So The Development Diplomat is a book, it's a policy book ultimately. But it's a book that shares through personal narrative and storytelling of my own adventures, traveling to, dozens of countries around the world where I worked on behalf of the US government to fight poverty at scale. It tells you the real behind the scenes stories, like how do you really get the jobs? I'm very honest and vulnerable about how I ended up in the Senate, working on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a few years. I'm honest about how I became a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the State Department, about how I ended up at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a US government development agency that's sadly being gutted right now in this administration. It's a journey, it's a story of how you get some of these jobs. It's a story of what you actually do when you get some of those jobs. Like, what does it mean to work on the Hill? What does it mean to work in an aid agency? What does it mean to be a diplomat? What could that look like for you? It's a story around how difficult it is to convince others on a shared set of values and goals, and what do those diplomatic negotiations look like? So I share the book opens with a story of the water sector in Mongolia and how, as a US diplomat and development official, our goal was to help protect and build out the water sector in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of 1.5 million people with an aging water sector? How do you design investments in the water sector where you get shared buy-in from the government of Mongolia, from all the way from the prime minister to the finance minister to the foreign minister, down to the mayor of Ulaanbaatar? Like, how do you actually do it? What are the stumbling blocks? How do you negotiate? How do you make sure within your own government you're on the same page? And so I share stories in that case of I spent just as much time with the US ambassador to Mongolia as I did with my Mongolian government counterparts, because you have to make sure that all parties are aligned. Um, this is the kind of work that may sound exciting to some people, but often they don't really know what it entails for real. So I share stories. I picked a few countries, in this case, like Mongolia and Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Jordan, Indonesia, some of the places where I've worked, to give you a behind the scenes look. And ultimately, it's a policy guide. So, how do you think about public policy in the development space? The book ends with some very practical chapters around what kind of courses and classes could you take if you were interested in this space. What are 6 critical skills I think you need to have if you want to be a development diplomat? And what do we not teach you in school that you should really think about learning if you want to succeed in this space? And we see today, Maina, with the breakdown of what's happening, of the departure of global leadership from the United States, why development diplomacy is more important than ever. So it's really a how-to guide for how to become a development diplomat.
I want to ask you about those things that you just mentioned a little bit later at the end, but kind of diving in deeper into the actual jobs that you were talking about. We scheduled this before foreign aid and USAID became such hot topics, but I think it's so necessary that we talk about them. From your vantage point, having served in government with nonprofit organizations, NGOs in this space, and then now contributing to this dialogue through academia, could you frame kind of what's going on right now and perhaps more importantly, share your perspective on the consequences of the actions that we're seeing being taken right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really sad moment, right? I mean, we are sitting at a historic crossroads. You know, for those of you that are obsessed with history as I am, I read history and I listen and I learn all about history every day, actually. And I think, wow, what would it be like to be living through that moment? And well, guess what? We all now get to say we're living through a historic moment. And it's a moment maybe many years in the making, but it's a moment when you're seeing unilateral self withdrawal of the United States from the global stage. And so the United States right now is basically saying it doesn't want to be a global leader anymore, right? And it's not going to invest in other countries unless it gets a return on investment that's very transactional for itself. That it does not think that being the superpower comes with global rights and responsibilities to care for others, and that, it does not care if others live and die, even when we have the capacity, the know-how, the resources to be able to save lives and invest in healthy lives in communities everywhere. And so that's a political choice we get to make, and that this administration is making right now. And it will have massive downstream consequences where needlessly millions of lives are literally lost. Millions, I think, could die because of what we are seeing to date. And certainly millions will not achieve the best quality of life that they could otherwise, both public health, economic justice, democratic rights and freedoms. And so, the United States has many warts and all, for sure. It's a very complex, complicated construction, but there's a lot of good that it can do to help communities all around the world. And that soft power is now being unilaterally dismantled, agency by agency. Um, it's also sad, though, Maina, that so few Americans know what we do abroad and can then therefore not fully appreciate the power of what the United States does to help so many communities around the world, so that when this is happening, there's not massive protest movements all around the country or anything like that. So I think we're sitting through a historic crossroads right now where you're seeing the overnight gutting of major US aid agencies like USAID in real time this week with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Peace Corps may be next, right around the door. Many other agencies have been dismantled or gutted. And that's going to mean that we don't get to participate and help So many countries and communities around the world where our resources, our knowledge, our partnership matter. They matter. Um, and so it's a sad moment. It's a really sad moment. It also means that a lot of jobs are lost. And for your generation entering the job market, it becomes one of the most complex job markets if you're interested in international development, in humanitarian operations, peacekeeping. It's a real complex moment to figure out how you can still show up and add value, which you can, by the way. So you absolutely can, but it has become that much harder to do so.
I want to branch off that last thing you said in terms of like adding value and kind of ways that, we can help aside from, what the government's doing. The Harvard Center for International Development resides within the Kennedy School of Government. Could you please discuss the center's mission, when it was created, and considering the times we're living in, what is the center's strategy going forward?
Yeah. So the Harvard Center for International Development, we sit at the Kennedy School, but we work Harvard-wide across the university. And we are a research center with a very simple but profound mission, which is we are here to build a thriving world for all. And that doesn't change because of what has happened in the last 4 months. In fact, it's just more important than ever. Our research is really a community-led effort across a community of about 140 faculty across the university that study development from so many different angles. A research community of fellows, of PhD students, of master's and undergraduate students, of policymakers. Collectively, we work in about 115 different countries on a whole range of issues, whether that's looking at issues like trade and tariffs and economic growth, whether that's looking at social safety and social protection initiatives and social safety nets, whether that's looking at gender and inclusion and cultural norms. There's a whole range of issues, as all of you know, in international development of what it takes to build healthy and thriving communities and economies. And so we get to partner with researchers, both here at Harvard and all around the world, interested in those topics. I'm going to come back to the mission for a second because when the tagline, building a thriving world for all, can just sound like a cheesy tagline. But what it really means is imagine that, when we think about the development sector and you think about humanitarian funding, most of the sector, the money really goes to a handful of about 10 countries, give or take, that are some of the most fragile, most conflict-ridden countries, some of the most poor countries where it's a floor approach where we're investing in a surviving world for some, right? And that's where most of our efforts go is to get, if we politically choose to care about you and we have the political will, we know how to get people to not die and how to live, right? We know how to do that. We have evidence, we have knowledge, we have interventions to help people live and not die. But once you live, which is the floor, right? How do we get you to thrive, right? It's not enough to just survive. We want to help people thrive, not just survive. So how do you help people fulfill not just the poverty line and get to the poverty line? How do you get people to fulfill their full potential wherever they are in life and wherever they are in the world? So that's a pretty big, ambitious mission. And that's what I get to work on every single day, which is really exciting and complex and complicated. And we don't do it alone. We do it in partnership with so many different policymakers, researchers, and curious learners. And we do it as like a continuous learning ecosystem here at CID. And I would also say everyone's invited to be part of that journey. So if you go to our website, cid.harvard.edu, you'll see a subscribe button. So subscribe to our newsletter, and you can keep abreast with all the different events and programs that we have. Join us for the ones that make sense if you're interested in learning more or participating. And there's lots of ways to kind of stay engaged as we build out this global community.
I want to ask you a little bit about, the people that we're talking about, getting them to the poverty line and then thriving. I know gender and social inclusion are key focus areas in your work, but in the political climate, at least here in the U.S., it feels like these issues are on attack or under attack a little bit. Do you see this becoming a trend across other countries? And if so, what are the consequences of a de-emphasis and a de-investment in those areas of gender and social inclusion?
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we all know the data here. We all know the facts that if you're going to purposely exclude certain segments of your society from the workforce, from the labor market, from political participation, from institutions, you're not you're not having the most productive economy, right? You're going to lag in labor force participation. You're going to lag in political participation. You're going to lag in productivity in your marketplace, right? So when societies make decisions to deliberately not invest in 100% of their citizens and their communities, you're leaving money on the table. Literally, you're leaving money on the table. And so, so many countries are facing choices right now of how do you grow your economies? How do you get out under debt? How do you actually make sure that you have a job market that can actually produce enough jobs for the youth that are coming up, particularly in places in Africa right now, which have some of the biggest youth populations alongside Afghanistan and Pakistan. So, if you are a policy leader, at any level, at a community level, local level, national level, and you are trying to figure out how to grow your economy, I would say, why would you leave money on the table? Right. And so when I think about inclusion, when I think about the gender lens, I don't think about it from a certain segment of society. I think about mainstreaming, and I really think about it from the lens of why leave money on the table.
Kind of adding on to that and talking about public service in general and going back a little bit to the mission of the Kennedy School, I know something that's important to all of you is preparing students to contribute to this dialogue in some form of public service in whichever sector is right for them, whether it's government, nonprofits, NGOs. But we are seeing, as you mentioned earlier, the workforce in almost every US federal agency is being dramatically reduced, including at the State Department. And people are concerned about whether they can have careers in public service anymore. What are your thoughts as we're seeing these reductions occur almost on a daily basis for those of us who are really looking to get involved?
Yeah. So look, this is a really dark time, and it's a really hard time for a lot of people. 100 as of I think this week. Um, about 177,000 jobs have been lost just with globally, just with the USAID stop work orders, right? Just with USAID alone. That's not even putting in all the other agencies that have been either, size scaled down or shut down. So it is a really difficult time for those that have lost jobs, those that were on the job market with job offers in hand that have now lost those potential jobs, and for those of you who are just in college or grad school trying to figure out what your next steps are. So I get it. It's a super tough time. And I'm going to say something that sounds really counterintuitive. Every crisis is an opportunity. And I think there's lots of opportunities ahead here. Where when one door closes, we all know the saying, another door opens. And I think the door that could be opening that we should be thinking about just looks a little bit different. So the need for public service is more important than ever. I'm a big believer in public service. My whole career is public service, and it's brought me tremendous joy, although not tremendous amounts of money, but tremendous amounts of joy. Because where else can you really say that your life's work gets to help so many others, not just here at home, but all around the world? So we need you more than ever. So don't go away, don't give up, and don't get dissuaded. Just get more creative, is what I would say. So, okay, maybe now's not the time to go to the federal level, go to the state level. Your states need you. Your states have some really cool governors who are doing super cool things. Go work at the state house. Go work at the state of offices, the state level offices. Work for your mayors. Work at the local community level. Nonprofits need you more than ever. There's a massive shift happening in the nonprofit sector. Some will shut down as a result of the lack of funding. Others will merge and consolidate. New ones will pop up. New social enterprises will pop up, right? Maybe you don't go get a job. Maybe you come up with a really cool idea for social enterprise and you pitch it to an investor who sees it and then puts in the money to help you get started, right? Maybe you leave the United States. You don't have to stay here. We're in a more global marketplace than ever. You can either virtually or physically. We have tremendous opportunities opening up throughout Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and then Europe, right? So things may seem really dark in certain spots and places, but there's light in lots of other places. Go to the light and create your own light and turn the lights on in other places that are dark. So I think we need you more than ever. The need has not gone away. Just where your starting point, maybe that shifts for a few years until, we go in and fix things.
Kind of an offshoot of the last question, and then as you mentioned, the last few chapters of your book, the skills that you think are helpful to this generation. What skills do you think are essential in the years ahead, and how should my generation think about the job market and how we approach higher education?
So what I've been thinking about a lot lately is AI, right? I think about AI every single day right now. I think about how to use it better for myself, but I also think about how it's going to fundamentally disrupt the job market, both in G7 economies, emerging economies, and other developing country contexts. So I would say a few things. Your generation is the best poised to take full advantage of the changing labor market, but you have to be really smart about it. The two critical things I think that I think about for my own kids right now, who are teenagers, is critical thinking. I think you have to be a critical thinker more than ever. If you're going to be a lazy AI user or tech user and copy paste, not even know what you're generating or using or saying, and not have your own point of view to understand what AI got right or wrong, your job is lost pretty fast in this. So critical thinking skills are going to be more important than ever. Knowing content yourself, super important, right? I use AI not blindly, but I use AI where I can say, it did a pretty good job here. It's pretty weak over here. And I know that because I know my own content so well, right? So know your content, know what you're passionate about, study it. You need to know it more than ever, more than ever. You don't get lazier, you have to get smarter, right? Because you have to know how to use the machine, how to use the tool to generate value. You can only generate value in the marketplace if you're a critical thinker. And I think you're going to need empathetic and emotional thinkers as well, because AI is not going to be able to do that in the same ways. So empathy plus critical thinking, I think, are going to be the two areas where I would really urge people to like triple and double down on, or I should say double and triple down in the coming years. So then you can use tools to make your productivity and make your lives and workplaces even, more productive and better, but not to substitute for the human brain and human capacity. So those are the areas where I talk to my own kids about, I talk to students about here, and areas where I'm working on myself.
Thank you. Thank you for that and for sharing everything you did, and for the emphasis on empathy and critical thinking. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for this podcast, Maina, and congratulations on everything you're working on and doing. Really inspiring. And for all your listeners out there as well, just don't give up. I think it's actually can be a really exciting time and we need you more than ever. So I'm excited to see what you all do. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.